Hey guys, so we are back for week 4. We are in Esther 4, and we're just going to pretty much hop right in here. I do want to apologize if there's any background noise. My daughter's home today. She's taking a nap right now, but she'll probably wake up. And the wind is insane right now. I don't know if you guys will be able to hear it, but if you can, I apologize. I did finally get a new setup where my phone is directly above the Bible, so you should be able to read everything. But as always, all of the notes will be available digitally, and I will link to those in the description box. So if you can't read my handwriting or anything like that, you can access those notes from there. All right, let's just hop right into this. I'm excited to get into Esther 4. So let me pull up my notes here. If you haven't already read the chapter, now is the time to do it. And we'll start with verse 1. When Mordecai learned all that had been done and tore his clothes, he put on a sackcloth and ashes and went out to the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. If you don't already know about like the mourning traditions of this time period, this is traditional. This is how people mourn. This is how they basically show sorrow. And so Mordecai keeps his integrity not by bowing down to Haman, but he also knows from what we saw in Esther 1:19 that once a decree goes out, it cannot be changed. So that's why he's mourning, because he knows his people are going to be killed. And although, he was able to keep his integrity, it is kind of his fault in a way, because Haman was the one that was the reason behind that decree. So we'll just make a little note here to Esther 1:19. Verse 2, but he went only as far to the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. So there are certain rules in kingdoms where, you can't necessarily enter the courts if you're not dressed properly and things like that. And since he was mourning, he did not enter it. So verse 3, in every province which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloths and ashes. So Mordecai's mourning was mimicked throughout the entire kingdom. As Jews learned about what would happen to them, they all just knew, this is kind of like the end here. So imagine if you were in their position where all of a sudden a decree came out or a new law was put out that on a certain day in the very near future, everyone was going to kill you. That would be pretty upsetting. So there's a lot happening in the kingdom, and it's quite shocking. When Esther's eunuchs came and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. So you have to remember that Esther lives in a kind of isolation within the kingdom. All she knows is that her cousin is outside the gate, he's lamenting and he's mourning. So she doesn't know why, she doesn't really know about this decree yet. So she just does, what she thinks is helping and sends him some clothes, trying to just say that she's providing for him and she's there for him in a way. It's also kind of important to note that Esther can't just go out to the city gate and meet her cousin and be like, hey, what's up? Why are you sad? She has to send attendants and eunuchs, and she's only getting this information from other people. So it really is a really isolating place that she's at, and it makes it very hard to kind of understand what's happening. So then in verse 5, we see Esther summoned 𝗃'𝗃, I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing that wrong, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So she sends someone out to figure out what is happening here. We'll make a quick note about that. So then in verse 6, this eunuch went out to find Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Verse 7, Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. So Mordecai knows that the king allowed this decree because of the money. This kind of explains, or he explains the situation to this eunuch so that Esther can understand the extent of the decree, and she knows to go to the king for help, essentially. This also points to Haman truly understanding the king and what he wants. He wants more money, he wants more power, and so Haman uses those two things to get this decree sent out. So Mordecai knows this as well, and he makes sure that Esther understands that. Let's jump to verse 8. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show Esther and explain it to her. He told him to instruct her to go to the king's presence and beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. So by Esther understanding this full situation, hopefully the king would understand the evil that Haman has done. So, like I said before, Esther doesn't know about any of this. She isn't able to see the decree. So Mordecai gives it to her servants and tells them everything to kind of relay back to Esther in hopes, kind of like last-ditch effort, that she can do something and maybe convince the king to spare her people. Okay, so the eunuch went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. She then instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people who are in the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one lot. They will be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." So let's break that down a little bit. Esther is basically challenged by Mordecai to go to the king and fight for this decree, or fight against this decree. And her response is telling Mordecai how hard that would actually be to get an audience with the king. She has not even seen her husband in a month. There are kind of specific rules and like tradition that is involved with seeing the king. You can't just go up to his throne and ask him a question, even as his wife. And so you would have to be like really smart, really cunning, and just kind of go about this really wise. Basically, the king will call you and extend his golden scepter, and then you know that you are safe to speak to the king. So remember that. That's going to go into chapter 5. So for now, we'll make a note. Okay, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. "Do not think that because you are the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for all the Jews will arrive from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." So, keep in mind here that they are speaking only by messenger. So, that likely means that Esther had little control of where she was or where she was allowed to go in the kingdom. So you need to remember that, like, just because she's the queen doesn't mean that she just has all this power. But nonetheless, Mordecai makes it really important to Esther. Whether she goes to the king or not, she will be killed because of this decree. She might as well intercede on their behalf. Because if she does nothing, then her entire family is going to be wiped out, with the chance of her being killed as well, because she is Jewish, and likely someone knows that, not just Mordecai. But also, if she goes to the king and nothing comes of it, or if she goes to the king and he kills her for going to him, either way, she perishes. So Mordecai says the quote, I'm going to underline it here, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." And this is such a quotable thing here. You'll probably see this all over Pinterest and stuff. It's kind of like, maybe this is why you're here. It's a really beautiful verse that just says, like, maybe you've been put into this position for a reason. And it's beautiful because this points to God's hand in this whole thing. God invites us to be part of his plans, not because he needs us, but because we need him. And whether Esther had played a role in this or not, God would have saved his people. But she gets the opportunity to be a part of God's plan, and that takes a lot of bravery and a lot of faith, but we'll see how that unfolds. So let me make a couple notes and we'll jump down. Okay, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. "Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So Mordecai is encouraged by Esther's bravery, and he fears God more than he fears Haman. So he goes out, and a bunch of people are now fasting for her. And this is kind of like the equivalent if you asked someone to just pray for you in preparation of something. Basically, they're doing this in order to fuel Esther's bravery and to kind of pray for her on her behalf, and to appeal to God on her behalf to let this be something that can help them. I want to point out a related passage as well, Psalm 115. So let's jump there really quick. It's a little long, so I'm not going to read through it, but I highly recommend that you just read to, it's a pretty short psalm. But basically the idea here is that whenever you feel like you don't have God near you, everyone else is not praising the same God as you, that doesn't mean that you're alone. The Lord will come to you when asked. And so that's kind of the idea behind the fasting, is that when you need help, God will help you. And again, this just points towards God's hand in this entire thing, that they go and they fast in order to prepare basically for what Esther is about to do, which we'll get into in verse 5. So let's make a couple more notes and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, so that is chapter 4. It's a pretty short chapter, but this is all kind of setting up the stage for the rest of the book to unfold. So I recommend that you read through it, make any notes, go ahead and download the additional notes. I have some study questions on there too if you kind of want to work through those. Everything will be linked down below as usual, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks.